Hello, everybody. Welcome to our first concurrent session, The Power of Indigenous Knowledge and Co-Creation, Decolonizing Evidence-Based Practices in Behavioral Health, presented by Shani Benedict, George Farrell, and Haley Osborne. Shani Benedict has more than 20 years of direct practice and leadership and experience in behavioral health with a BS in addiction studies and an MS in psychology. She has expertise in certified community behavioral health centers, treatment courts, first episode psychosis, medication-assisted treatment, and behavioral health and primary care integration, all with a focus on reducing disparities in outcomes. Her passion is creating systemic community changes through deep collaboration. George Farrell is a member of the Hunkpapa Lakota people from the Standing Rock Reservation in South Dakota. His work promotes equity within Native American communities with a focus on traditional medicines and cultural practices. He has vast experience in nonprofit operations and development and specializes in reentry coordination, fostering partnerships, and community engagement. His passions include implementing restorative justice models within communities of color and advocating for inclusive and sustainable practices. Awesome. Haley Osborne is a community hub operations specialist at Healthy Here, King County's accountable community of health. She's worked in a variety of social service roles, locally and globally, including a holistic substance use disorder recovery program in Medellin, Colombia. Her experience in social work includes collaboration with community agencies to implement culturally appropriate and holistic care plans. Skilled in care planning, psychotropic medication management, and care coordination, Haley is dedicated to culturally responsive and inclusive practices through patient-centered, collaborative behavioral health care. And now I am so delighted to turn it over to our speakers. Thank you so much all for being here. I am so excited to hear your presentation, and I shall hand it over to you.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. Yani Washday. Good morning. My name is George Farrell. My Lakota name is Sichola Mato. And with opening this discussion up, I would like to give us a small offering from our people. We have a kind of like a grounding that would be good for us anytime we are coming to deliver some good information or share some knowledge, share some medicine. So with that, a couple words of this song is, we're asking for assistance, in all the things that we do, and we do that in our daily lives as tribal people. We all have a way of doing this. So with that, I'd like to give you guys a verse of this song before we get started to make sure that all the things that we do and all the things that we say are said with truth and sincerity. Wakantaka toka heya chewa kielo hey wakantaka toka heya chewa kielo Meitakoyeo waniktaja tokaheya chewa kielo With that, we want to ask all of our people, our relatives that are watching, to help us do this. We do it as a community, as a people. And with that, I would like to pass it over to my colleague Shani and Haley.
Thank you, George. My name is Shani Benedict. My pronouns are she, her, and they've asked us to include a brief description about ourselves. So I am a middle-aged white woman wearing a dark blue button-up shirt. And like George, I'm an equity and engagement manager with Healthier Here. Haley?
Thanks, Shani. My name is Haley Osborne. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Community Hub Operations Specialist with Healthier Here. I am a white woman in my early 20s. I have glasses and brown hair. And with that, I'd like to introduce a little bit about what we do as an organization at Healthier Here. Healthier Here is a nonprofit collaborative dedicated to advancing health equity in King County. And our mission is to help eliminate health disparities and improve overall well-being in King County through innovative cross-sector collaborations and co-creation. We're really excited to be here today, and we're just going to jump right in. As we begin today, I'd love to start by grounding us with our land acknowledgement. Every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed their resilience and energy to making the history that led to this moment. We recognize the people who were marginalized but refused to be non-existent. Some were brought here against their will, and some were drawn to leave their distant homes in hope of a better life. And some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We want to respectfully acknowledge the Coast Salish peoples, whose ancestors and descendants have stewarded this land and water since time immemorial. We pay respects to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. Please join us in uncovering such truths today. And as I personally reflect on what this land acknowledgement means to me today for this presentation, I think about the importance of remembering and acknowledging the harm that has been done and what it could look like to work together in partnership and respect, and that there's an invitation to all gather around the table to build community and connection, working alongside one another, all to help create better behavioral health outcomes for American Indian and Alaska Native people. So with that, I'll pass it over to Shani.
If you are here today from a Native-led and Native-serving organization, we want to say thank you. Thank you for leading the way in decolonizing behavioral health. For you, we have no notes. We are not asking you to make any changes. We also recognize that no people are a monolith, that each tribal nation is sovereign and unique, and that we're going to be making generalizations today that don't apply to every nation or to every person. If you are here from a non-Native-led organization, we want to say thank you. Thank you for having the desire to better serve the Native American, Alaskan Native, and urban Indian clients at your organization. We understand that some of what we share will likely make you uncomfortable, and that's okay. We ask you to explore that discomfort with curiosity and use it as fuel to change. I'd like to pass it back to George, who's going to share with us why are we specifically talking about our American Indian, Alaskan Native, and urban Indian community members. George?
Thank you for that, Haley and Shani. Thank you for the words, and I also want to acknowledge all the tribal people for attending this and for putting your comments in the comment section. We thank you for doing that. We thank you for being that rock in the ocean when sometimes it feels like it's, you're out there by yourself. We understand that. Coming to this conversation and to this topic of why we are focusing on Native American, Alaskan natives, indigenous people, what are some of the factors to consider in talking about health equity for the people? When I say the people, I include myself in that. Talking about tribal people and indigenous people of this country, we often think about all of the systemic oppression that tribal peoples have endured, some of the social determinants of health and health disparities for American Indians and Alaskan Natives. Along with those, we have a slide up that kind of goes over a little bit of information as far as like the poverty line and food access, the amount of indigenous people experiencing ACEs, life expectancy of tribal people, and also the suicide rate But some of those things that aren't necessarily on there are, you know, the rates of incarceration and those systemic outcomes that uh, follow that. So today, you know, with the people present, we're going to be talking about what a little bit of that tribal self-determination looks like. You know, the how tribes are best able to determine their own policies, plans, and goals needed to achieve health equity for the people. Some of the social determinants of health. Health and well-being are impacted by social, economic, and environmental factors. Um, you know, health equity for tribal people means more than just Western uh, constructations of health and justice. It also includes understanding the interconnectedness of of human health with the land, water, and all living things. Um, you know, we have to come to a place in our understanding of tribal peoples and the forms of oppression that have been subjugated to. You know, the dominance in behavioral health fields and mental health fields uh, with a Western viewpoint is some of the fact that actually contributes to the factors of disparities within tribal communities. We have to talk about adapting programs, Medicaid and Medicare programs that could be adapted to cover a wider range of tribal services, programs, and providers. Some of those things, you know, for improving health equity in tribal communities could be improving Medicare, Medicaid prior authorization practices, providing billing and coding support, and ensuring Indian healthcare providers are reimbursed for all telemedicine services. Um, some of these health disparities, as we know, have been placed upon Indian people since, you know, before my generation, kind of into my mother's generation and my grandmother's generation. You know, some of those things include the Indian Removal Act, of uh, forced removal of Indian children into boarding schools allotment, and you know, a piece of that policy of termination. You know, the cultural genocide that has happened through those boarding schools to Native children. You know, and prohibited them from speaking their language, um, practicing their cultural traditions, and were forced to speak a language that was not our own and couldn't encompass the understanding of our spiritual well-being as Indian people. um, you know, our culture is one thing that kind of guides us. It has always been there, and that has never changed. The legacy of and continued practice of colonial subjugation has, you know, began some generations ago, and only recently with such acts as like the ERFA, uh, the Indian Healthcare Act, you know, and those connections to the land and restorative practices uh, has really come to light. Um, so, in speaking about some of those things, I would like to give a little bit of background on the uh, EBPs that we are kind of talking about. And so, with that, I will shift this to my colleague Shani, who can kind of go into that a little bit and help us to become more focused in that. So, with that, I'll pass it to you, Shani.
Thanks, George. I think it's so important for us to realize that the reason we are focusing so much attention and energy appropriately on our Native American community members is because of that history of colonization and the way that that continues to play out in present day in people's lives, resulting in health disparities specifically. That's the lens of our organization. And you are here today because that's already information that you are grounded in as well. You're here because you want to learn about decolonizing behavioral health, and more specifically, how to adapt evidence-based best practices for the Native American and Indigenous community members you serve. And we're going to deliver that in 3 easy steps. Step 1 is the easiest, and that's to question everything you already know and have ever learned about behavioral health and evidence-based best practices. Question everything. If you were like Haley and me and had a colonized education, by that I mean an education that was primarily white and Western-centric, then you may view behavioral health as a very linear and individualistic experience that could sound something like this. You have a new client, we're going to call him Joe, and he shows up at your door. He's given intake and demographic forms and fills out screening forms like the PHQ-9 and GAD-7 in your lobby. Then he meets with an intake specialist, possibly an employee who he'll never see again. He's diagnosed with a mental disorder or a substance use disorder using the DSM-5. He then likely receives treatment with whatever evidence-based best practices your organization is proficient in. That probably includes cognitive behavioral therapy, which was developed by white people, dialectical behavioral therapy, which was developed by white people, or motivational interviewing, again, developed by white people. If Joe had high scores on the PHQ-9 and GAD-7 or your other outcome screening tools, then likely he's going to receive more frequent and intensive services until his outcome measures begin to improve, or until you see no improvement and begin documenting with words like unresponsive or non-compliant. And as a total side note, if you are still already using those words in your clinical documentation or even just in your head, please question them and consider replacing them with, I haven't used the right intervention or removed the right barriers for this client to benefit. It's a completely different mindset from non-compliant. So let's break down some of the colonization problems in the process that I just outlined for you, which is a very standard new patient experience. Our intake forms ask intrusive questions before any relationship or trust has been established. And we need to remember that there is real and reasonable mistrust of medical systems that has been learned and taught. So not having that established trust is a huge barrier towards engagement. We ask about personal trauma, but our questions on our intake forms ignore how generational or systemic trauma has impacted someone's life. We ask about primary family relationships, but we don't ask about someone's relationship to their community or to their or to the land. We ask about food insecurity, but we don't ask about whether they have access to culturally specific foods or food as medicine. Our demographic forms ask questions about race and ethnicity in a way that may not align with how someone identifies and doesn't provide an opportunity for tribal identity to be reflected, which results in identity erasure. Our screening tools are problematic. This was such a learning moment for me when I found out that the PHQ-9 was developed by Pfizer Pharmaceuticals, specifically to increase the sales of Zoloft. I can't find any evidence that the PHQ-9 or GAD-7 have ever been researched specifically with Native Americans, and barely any evidence that they've ever been researched more broadly in any non-white community. The higher folks score on these Western developed screening tools, the more Western-centered interventions we use on them. And then we wonder why our colonized treatment isn't working. We provide one-size-fits-all assembly line services, and then we wonder why it doesn't work for everyone. We have a question that we're going to ask you to reflect on in the chat. Thinking about the colonized behavioral health model, that linear and individualistic model that we just described for you, What aspects of the colonized behavioral health model do you see in your workplace? And we're going to give you a minute to be able to respond. Thank you to those of you who have shared in the chat. Another example of colonized behavioral health is one we learned about fairly recently. So in almost every psychology course I've ever taken, there has been reference to the universally applicable Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it's the pyramid on the left-hand side, representing how every person has basic physical needs to meet first, followed by other building blocks of needs, eventually culminating in self-actualization as the highest pinnacle of personal achievement. In theory, it's supposed to apply equally to everyone, which probably should be our first red flag words when we are thinking about equally versus thinking about equality. So in theory, it's supposed to equally apply to everyone. But a part of the story that we didn't know is that in 1938, before he published his theory, Abraham Maslow spent 6 weeks living with the Siksika people, who are known in English as Blackfoot, in what is now Alberta, Canada. And he was there testing the universality of his theory on social hierarchies. And he learned from them a way of being that completely challenged his theory. It didn't change his theory, but it challenged his theory. Instead of each person individually striving to meet their personal needs for food, shelter, water, clothing, and warmth, the Siksika met those needs collectively as a community. It wasn't one person's responsibility to ensure that they had enough water. Their tribe provided for them. Safety needs, love, belonging, esteem, being part of their tribal community provided these needs, causing Maslow to observe that the Siksika experienced his ideal of self-actualization, that pinnacle of achievement. He measured them as achieving that at a rate of 80 to 90%, which is wild. Like, that's just amazing. Conversely, in New York, where Maslow was living at the time, when he was studying people in New York, they were at self-actualization at about 5 to 10% of the time. So these are enormous, enormous differences. Self-actualization was the starting point in terms of met needs for the Siksika, which contributed then to community actualization and ultimately to that highest pinnacle of achievement in their value system, which is cultural perpetuity, the maintenance of culture and values and their knowledge system, the passing on of tribal wisdom and traditional practices to future generations. That was their highest value of attainment. As Maslow later in life reflected upon his time with the Siksika, he wrote, "Self-actualization is not enough. The good of other people must be invoked as well as the good for oneself." Maslow's experience proved to him that his theory wasn't universal, and yet, in our Western colonized educational systems, we've falsely been taught that it is. For those of you who are open to self-education, I highly recommend a quick Google search for Maslow and the Blackfoot people. It's a stark reminder that the knowledge systems many of us were taught as universal are anything but. And there are indigenous knowledge systems that long predate colonization that are still applicable today. I'm going to pass it over to George to share some about these systems.
Thank you for that, Shaney. That was very informative. And speaking about indigenous knowledge systems. I know that there are probably quite a few individuals who work for, native-led, native-serving organizations that address these things. But a part of our um, talk about behavioral health and mental health and what those things look like, you know, um, as we look at the behavioral health system as it is now mainstream, many indigenous individuals tend to reject evidence-based medicine because of the legacy of the cultural dominance and the subjugation of it, and the longstanding power imbalances. Um, Efforts to change and even eradicate American Indian culture. Uh, Many indigenous people see mainstream clinical interventions as irrelevant and ineffective. Um, Further, the routines and logic of conventional mental health clinics were developed from traditions that are far different than indigenous uh, therapeutic traditions. Although there are different healing methods in indigenous communities, many share common principles and values. Um, for example, many of the Native American healing traditions and customs are based on cosmology and selfhood. Um, and there is a relational aspect to that that differs from mainstream interventions and practices. Um, some rely on the role of healers in the community. And also, many of the healers emphasize the concept of people working together through relationships to bring that good medicine to the forefront. Um, Given our cultural differences and legacies of oppression, many indigenous people are dissatisfied with evidence-based approaches. And through the culture and through our oral practices from our elders, they have told us in many different settings throughout Indian country, from tribe to tribe, from nation to nation, that uh, everything that we are experiencing can be healed through the culture. And um, we are at a point where we have to highlight those things and in a lot of ways show the worth of those things. In Indian country, we already know that those things are uh, the predominant healing methods for us. You know, the things about traditional food, traditional medicines, um, the system dynamics, you know, and the cultural practices. We know that those things are elements of our healing, and um, there are a lot of different methods that are used to achieve that. Um, so, in speaking about that, I would like to offer this chance for my colleague Haley to talk about a little bit of decolonizing behavioral health. So I'll pass that to you, Haley.
Thank you, George, and thank you, Shani, for painting the picture of kind of where we're at today. So now that we've examined both the colonized and the Native American Indigenous behavioral health models, there's a distinct difference between the two. One takes on a more individual focused lens, and the other is more grounded in culture and community. And there's a dissonance here that popped up for me that has potential big implications for the American Indian Alaska Native community. And by solely utilizing the Western-centric screening tools and EBPs without taking into account the lived experience and culture and traditions of the people, we're ultimately doing a disservice to our Native American Indigenous community members seeking behavioral health care, and ultimately risk creating more harm than good. And in our realm of serving clients, we want to do what's best for the client to make sure they have the best outcome possible. So we bring all this up to say, we're not throwing everything out the window. And there's an invitation to decolonize the current behavioral health model by modifying the model that's currently culturally dominant. So you might ask, how do I even begin? What does it mean to decolonize behavioral health? And so there's a lot of things that we can do to start pointing us in that direction. And as I mentioned earlier, it all starts with everyone having a seat at the table. When everyone has a seat, you're in conversation, you're gathering alongside one another and respecting one another's opinions and backgrounds and upbringings and wisdom and knowledge that different people at the table bring. And so starting at the table, we can listen and recognize the knowledge systems that might be outside of our own. As George mentioned earlier, we need to continue to acknowledge and reflect on the historical and generational and systemic trauma experienced by American Indian Alaska Native people. And it could look like coming together as a team in your organization to reflect, have conversations and dive deeper into relationship and dialogue about this. It can look like collaborating with and referring to tribal-led and tribal-serving organizations, which we're going to jump into a little bit more later. It could also look like uplifting tribal and community voices, looking outside of our own organizations and seeking different perspectives for how we can work together to best serve our clients. And this could also look like uplifting and advocating for funding of traditional medicine. As all of us know, money is a big player in healthcare and plays a role in what can and cannot be implemented. And so when we advocate for the funding of traditional medicine, there's potential for more programs that can be created to help serve those populations. And as Shani had mentioned earlier, another way to decolonize is to take a really good look at the evidence-based best practices that we're using, in addition to the screening tools and the intake forms, and being really aware of identity and data erasure. And so this is just a high level of what this could look like. So I'm going to pass it back over to Shani as we take a deeper dive into what this could look like for you.
Thank you, Haley. So towards the beginning, we said we were going to tell you how to adapt and decolonize in 3 easy steps. So step 1 was forget everything that you ever were taught, anything you thought you knew. That's step 1. Step 2 is really genuinely reflecting and considering whether you, your organization, and the evidence-based best practices and interventions you use are genuinely the best treatment option for our Native American and Indigenous community members. This step is really hard because we like to think of ourselves as experts. Like that is a key component of many of us in the field. We want to believe that we are experts, that the things that we have learned are the best approaches, the things that have been researched by our Western-centric universities. That is where we have viewed expertise as being held. So asking you to really genuinely reflect on whether EBPs are even the right approach. The step is harder because it requires us to really question the mainstream framework for behavioral health, and it requires us to acknowledge we may not be the experts in the room, and that's okay. I'd like to pass it back over to George, who's going to help us explore more on this reflection.
Wow, thank you guys for that, and for the individuals in the chat and who are live with us. I would like to give a concept to you that has been given to us many times over, and I have this slide on the screen that is in reference to this. When we say only a spider can repair a spider's web, that is in reference to us leaning into Indigenous people's cultural and historical practices that have encompassed healing and prosperity for our Indigenous peoples. We oftentimes rely on mainstream behavioral health and clinical practices to tell us what is wrong. There are so many constructs of knowledge and wisdom systems that are already present within our communities that is in a lot of ways being suppressed and not able to access those things to urban Indian populations, even populations on the reservation. Um, and so I want to, in saying that, I would like to offer this question, in reference to this. Why would indigenous people of these lands look to the very mindset and colonial constructs for the answers that those mindsets and colonial constructs have placed on us? We and those who are watching, professionals, we are asking and have been asking with our partners, both clinical, native-led, tribal-led, serving those communities to lean into those knowledge systems. Work that has been being co-created and co-designed with community is one of the pillars of Healthier Here's work, through committees and investments into that. Our partners who are doing wonderful work. There is many organizations that are now encompassing and have encompassed that traditional medicines aspect and are just now being able to show those things and have the data that so many people ask for. So with that, I would like to pass this to Haley to present this video.
When we start our work, we always do our best to give an offering. So, with a good heart, good mind, good spirit. And so we usually bring our medicines. So we'll either have like tobacco or sage or rose water.
Being in community is vital. And being in community means singing, dancing, drumming, doing our beadwork, doing our drum making. Those are all important as part of our being in good health.
Kind of our overall network to serve our community was really grounded in strengthening our cultural identities. And for us as the Seattle Indian Health Board, that means that everything we do is centered on traditional Indian medicine. It is about a transfer of power in the sense that we honor and recognize our Indigenous knowledge in the same way that we do other Western modalities.
Unkitawa, our mission is to be able to bring traditional knowledge and teaching, ceremony, prayer into the urban settings.
We are really proud at the Seattle Indian Health Board to be leaders in this arena and really want to support our other communities of color to do the same, because the truth is we know how to heal our communities. We know how to live in a culture of wellness if we could just get Western systems to get out of the way.
So we all need different types of healing in order for that to happen, in order for people to get reconnected to their people, to their land. We need that flexibility, because what works for one tribe and one nation doesn't work for the next. And in order to make those connections, in order to help people to have the accessibility, the funding needs to be flexible. And the only way you're going to truly understand how flexible is that is really sit down with the Native folks, the people who are actually doing the work, and ask them, hey, how does this work? Where do you see you need more money at? Where do you see you need more investment at. That's the only way you're going to find out.
You know, it can be the type of job where like progress is slow, but to stick with it and to see all of the native Northwest plants that have been kind of driven out, but now are reemerging strong. That's a product of this partnership and this work, and it's so critical. It's why we're thriving. It's why our Native youth are thriving.
We incorporate more prayer and traditional practices into the way we try to tend and manage and take care of and learn from the plants. We know everyone comes from different tribes and different backgrounds, but we try to make it as intertribal as possible.
We're all really connected with Mother Earth and with each other. And so why not be in partnership with each other? Why not support each other? Why not lift up each other?
Here we are today, where Healthier Here is funding so many cultural aspects or strengthening cultural approaches for our communities by dedicating those resources. And to me, this should just be the beginning.
Thank you for that video, Haley. And some of the co-creation and co-design with community, what those things could look like, those principles that are uplifted through that work with community would be stewardship, accountability, equity, the value-centered active leadership, and the community voice and sustainability. And with that, I would invite Haley to kind of round us out with that.
Sweet. Thank you, George. George kind of touched on everything that was covered in that video. And here's a slide just kind of about what In Good Health means in community partnership with everyone, with specifically the Indigenous Nations Committee. These are some ways that they describe what In Good Health means. And as you can see, it might be different from what we commonly hear in the behavioral health realm. So we wanted to make sure this was highlighted, and just the importance of amplifying community voice specifically in advocating for better behavioral health outcomes. So I will pass it on over to Shane.
We haven't been able to fully pay attention to the chat, but as I've been able to scan some of the things that I've seen in there, thank you for the very rich comments. One theme that I have heard is this feeling of being constrained and being forced to have to use evidence-based best practices because of how our payment systems work right now today. And there is certainly a need for payment system reforms. MCOs, if you are on the line, thank you. Thank you for choosing to be here. We look forward to working with you on trying to figure out how to change the way that payment works. That is a tall order, as is adapting our evidence-based best practices. So this slide really, it comes to us from SAMHSA and their work around adapting evidence-based best practices for various communities. we want to focus on adapting EBPs as one tiny piece of a larger process of decolonization. And the reason we want to focus on EBPs, I just kind of want to share what a friend of mine said to me last week. I was speaking to a friend who's Indigenous last week about this presentation and was talking to her about the need to decolonize behavioral health and encourage systems to move to embrace traditional healing practices when that's appropriate for who they are serving. And she reminded me, you can't just do away with the EBPs, not yet. She pointed out that she and many other American Indian and Alaskan Native people have achieved recovery from mental health and substance use disorders using evidence-based best practices, and that we really need to consider a both and approach that is genuinely individualized for each person who is being served. So for the folks where we still feel like, okay, we're the best organization, we're the best provider, and this EBP is the absolute best and only tool that is going to be effective, and we want to adapt our EBPs, this is the actual process. So it's guidance from SAMHSA on using a cyclical process for adapting EBPs, and it begins at the top in that yellow circle with one of Healthier Here's core values, engaging the community. Even before you engage the community, there is that need to really ask yourself, am I the right leader to adapt an EBP for this community? Unless you are part of the community that you want to change the EBP for, or you have deep, authentic, enduring relationships in that community, let's stop right here and agree that you might not be the best person. There's a reason that while I have used CBT, DBT, and MI in my practice for 20 odd years, I have never personally adapted an EBP for other people who are not white women. What I don't want you to do is take that as discouragement, though. There are other ways that you can contribute. Just because you might not be the expert in adaptation doesn't mean there's other ways that you can't participate. So if you are someone who has positional power at an organization, there is an opportunity for you to set the table for change. Create spaces that allow and encourage learning and change, and support and remove barriers for the community who seeks change in evidence-based best practices or other behavioral health practices. Maybe your role is in step 2, assessing your organization's capacity and readiness to change. And if your assessment determines that there are roadblocks to readiness, be the person who moves to unblock those roadblocks. When your organization is ready and the community you want to serve is at the table, and not just at the table, but centered at that table, work with that community to choose an evidence-based best practice and determine which of the non-core components of that practice can be adapted. Step 3 is reviewing your organization's EBPs and choosing one. Again, this is a step where community must be central in making the decision about which EBP to attempt to adapt. It's not for you or your organization to decide. The 4th step in this process is identifying the non-core components that can be modified. We often think of evidence-based best practices as totally and completely rigid because we want to meet fidelity so that we get paid. All of that totally makes sense to me. But even within these rigid models, there are still opportunities to be flexible, more opportunities than what you might think. Fidelity is important, but there are also other things that can be adapted. So thinking about, to begin with, who is delivering the intervention? Is it somebody doing the CBT intervention in a group setting? Is that person someone who has credibility and established trust and relationships in that community. That's the first piece, is who is delivering your intervention. In your intervention, are there stories? Are there examples? And are there anecdotes? In almost every EBP, there is some element of storytelling or examples that are used. Do these stories reflect the community that's being served, or are they colonized examples? Are the check-in questions or the checkout questions that you use at the beginning or ending of a session, are they reflective of the values of the community that's being served? Listen to your community, implement the changes that they recommend, and ask them then in step 5, how will you know whether or not the changes were a success? We measure success in so many different ways in behavioral health, our outcome measures, so many different data pieces that we use to measure success. How does community want to measure success? What measuring stick would they like to use? And then use that one. All of that leads us right back to that top yellow circle again of engaging the community. And SAMHSA has that as the starting point and the ending point for this cycle of change. And I would not challenge much about this model except for the engage the community piece, because really that is the piece that needs to be central to every single step. Engaging the community in assessing the organization's capacity and readiness to change, engaging the community in reviewing the EBPs, in selecting the EBPs, in determining which non-core components can be modified, and in assessing the effectiveness of your intervention. Community needs to be engaged, but more than engaged, they need to be the central and amplified voice in the decision-making process. I'd like to pass it on to Haley, who's going to be speaking or highlighting for us organizations who are already doing the work of centering and celebrating our American Indian and Alaskan Native community members. Haley?
Thank you, Shani. Yeah, as Shani said, we just wanted to highlight some organizations that are in King County that are already serving Native American Indigenous communities. And all of these were mentioned in the video that we showed. So the Cowlitz Indian Tribe, the Nakani Native Program, Seattle Indian Health Board, United Indians of All Tribes Foundations, and Unkitawa. Each of them have a wide list of services that they offer, and each of them have specifically medical services that they offer. And so I would encourage you to look into these organizations as a starting point if you don't already have people in your network, and just start thinking about what it might look like to build that. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to George and Shani to round us out today.
Thank you for that, Shani and Haley. We are actually going to begin to close this out with our call to action. We're asking individuals on this call to do your personal work, listen and learn, self-educate, and advocate for those organizational changes. Create those co-create pieces within your work streams, and do that collaboratively, with the Indigenous people. Speaking to those things, I would like to use this last couple minutes as a gratitude for all the people who are present. We give our many thanks to you for your blessings of your presence in this. And also, we would like to close this with a verse of one of our thank you songs for the people. And, as we do that, we always ask for good health, to keep all of you safe and out of harm's way, and to continue to promote those good things for the people. And along with those organizations, there are a lot of other organizations that are doing that wonderful work for the people. Our partners at the Chief Seattle Club, Mother Nation, they are doing and carrying a big load, with the people. And we thank you for that. With that, in celebration of this, I'd like to give you guys a piece of this thank you song. And this song means all around the world, I bring my voice. I'm grateful for the life that I have. that the Creator has given to me. Makasitone ya hoye wa ucha Toka shela we chosane ke enamaku elo aya ila ipelo ila maya yelo. With that, thank you guys.
All right. Hello. Thank you guys so incredibly much. What an amazing, amazing presentation. Just so appreciate your willingness to share your wisdom, your experience in such an honest and challenging way, in a way for us to check the clinical education we've had, and really particularly appreciate all your very specific, here's what you can do.